Hello and welcome to Tate Google Hangout. We are here amongst turners, I have to say, in Tate Britain, here to talk about photography and art. I'm Miranda Sawyer and I have 5 experts, 2 with me here and 3 brought to you by the magic of the internet. So I'll introduce them. First up we have Dr. Simon Baker, over here. Wave to the camera.
Good evening.
Simon is Curator of Photography and International Art at Tate. And next to me, I have Miles Aldridge. He's a fashion photographer and artist. Do you want to wave, Miles?
Hi.
Okay. I have his book here, so I'll wave it. Acid-hued and sometimes erotically charged photography has been featured in Vogue, Numero, and the New York Times, and Miles recently held a retrospective at Somerset House entitled I Only Want You to Love Me. Now, via the magic of the internet, we are going to introduce our 3 other experts. First up, we have Fiona Crisp. Fiona, are you there? Hello, Fiona. Fiona is an artist who works with photography, and she's known for creating installations of large-scale photographs designed to question the presence of the photographic image. Fiona's work is represented in the Tate collection and was recently displayed as part of the Looking at the View exhibition at Tate Britain. Next up, we've got Gregory Barker. Gregory, are you there? Hello. Gregory is a London-based editor and publisher, commissioning editor at Hot Shoe magazine, which is the UK's leading independent contemporary photographic magazine and covers the best of established and up-and-coming photographers. And finally, last but not least, we have Michael O'Neill. Are you there, Michael? Are you going to pop up, Michael? We know you're there. There you are, Michael. Hiya. Michael is an American photographer based in San Francisco. He's a former graphic designer, and his photography career was launched when he became one of the suggested people to follow on Instagram, a platform he believes has democratized the ability to create great photographs. So we're all here in our hangout, and we're going to talk photography and art. I am going to begin with you, Simon. And what I'm going to start off with is the idea that for many years, photography had a kind of lower status when compared with contemporary art. Art historians perhaps didn't take photography quite as seriously as they did fine art, unless it was kind of hung on a wall. It wasn't taken seriously at all. Do you think these prejudices are changing? And if they are, why?
That's a great question, or a great series of questions. So really, if we think about it, if we think about the history of art altogether, photography has always been there. Right from the very beginning, photographers were arguing that what they were doing was fine art and should be treated equally and on the same level. But that really was a long battle that photographers were trying to fight. And in fact, at certain moments in the history of art, photographers are extremely successful at being taken seriously. If we think about Man Ray and the surrealism in the 1920s, you have an incredible moment where photographers were really treated very equally. If we also think about the Bauhaus, this great kind of design and art school, we have some of the most famous photographers of the 20th century working alongside painters. So there are these great moments where photography is treated equally. But then likewise, as you say, in other times we look around art galleries and we see photography strangely missing. So I think that there's a tension within the way we understand history of art, where photography sometimes takes its place alongside other media and sometimes seems to slip into the background.
Disappear. I'd like to bring in somebody from the Google Hangout area, somebody not with me, and I don't mind which of you 3 answer this question, but what I wanted to ask is about the relationship that photography has with the public. So the public generally has been always quite pro-photography, it seems to me. So, I mean, even if you think about within Tate Britain, there was we've had a kind of great success with the show that was shown during the Olympics in 2012. And in 2007, is this right, the first ever photography show at Tate was shown? Just sort of to check this. Might be right.
No, I think
called How We Are Photographing Britain, and that was a massively successful show.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask, and anybody on my little hangout area out there can answer this one, why you think photography has always resonated with the public perhaps more greatly than it has done with experts? Who wants to answer? You can wave or you can shout. I'm going to ask you to answer. Okay, I'm going to throw it to Michael. Why do you think it resonates more with the public?
Unmute myself. I think there's just a lot more images in the world right now. The apps like Instagram with 150 million users, it's just more in the public mainstream. We're looking at stuff every day. There's so many images flying by you. And I think people have a greater appreciation for photography because they see it so much. And a great image has to cut through all of this clutter because there are so many images out there in the world. Um, yeah, that's kind of how I feel right now.
There's something we might say to address that as well. When you mentioned another London show at Tate Britain last year, many of those photographs would originally have been in magazines and more popular forums. And in fact, one of the things we could say about photography is it sometimes changes its mode of understanding from something with a very broad audience to then being put in a museum wall. And I think that may be an interesting thing to think about as well, that we may be familiar with photographs all around us, but what will make us stop and look in a museum and treat that photograph differently?
Do you find, Miles, as a kind of working photographer, that your work is taken more seriously? We have a book here of your work. Do you find it's taken more seriously if it's presented in a book format than it is perhaps if it's presented in a magazine format?
We reach different audience, obviously. You know, the magazines I work for, like Italian Vogue, they probably have a sort of readership of about 20,000, whereas a book can, along with an exhibition, can reach, well, hopefully more than that.
Longer.
Yeah, and also a very different audience. Obviously, sort of my work is begins as fashion photography.
You can see some of your work now, actually. Oh. It's coming up. But I mean, do you get, just simply by giving it a status of being in a book, or perhaps hung in a photographic exhibition, that changes the way that people feel about a photograph?
I think it does. Even for myself, the first gallery that exhibited me, they found my work in Italian Vogue and asked me to exhibit, and so it was actually the first time I'd seen my work in that different context of it being presented as art, as it were. But once I started that kind of conversation back and forth with the gallery, it then kind of grew and grew.
Did you feel more differently? Did you feel different about your work?
I did feel very different about it, yeah, because the original intention for the work was really to do images that would, actually it's interesting hearing the chap earlier speaking about so many images in the world. Actually, my intention has always been to create images that stop that kind of hideous magazine flicking through images and images. So, when I started to work for Italian Vogue, I tried to do images that were quite kind of beautiful, but rather shocking too, in a way. So you weren't quite sure if you were being attracted by the imagery or repulsed by it, But it had the effect of stopping people turning the pages. And actually, the image that the gallery spotted in Italian Vogue that they wanted to present as art was simply an egg with a cigarette stubbed out in it. And I managed to get that put into Italian Vogue because there was a little bit of lipstick on the cigarette, and that lipstick could be discussed as a colour for women to wear. And that's,
when stubbing their cigarette out on an egg.
Yeah. So that's how it went, yeah.
I'm going to kind of throw a quote out now, and I'm going to throw it to Fiona. And it is a quote from a photographer, from Lord Snowdon. It says, this is what he said once: "Photography is not art, it's about moving levers and pressing buttons. People like me took up photography because we could not draw." Would you agree with him?
It's an interesting quote, isn't it?
I like the idea of kind of pushing levers. I don't know quite what he's been taking photographs on.
Yeah, like it's just completely mechanical. I mean, in some respects it is pushing levers and using an instrument like that, using a tool. But I think you can't just see it only in that context, because as soon as you start to make an image, then you have to think about its aesthetic qualities, its formal qualities, its conceptual qualities. So I think it's, I'm not sure how tongue-in-cheek Lord Snowdon was when he was saying this, because I think we've gone far beyond the idea that drawing is a way of making art, or an exclusive way of making art.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, this is again thrown to kind of anyone, do you think that there is a certain amount of technique that's needed in order to be a photographic artist?
Speaking as somebody who's completely useless with any form of camera, I would say absolutely. But there is that residual sense that, and in fact, some of the very first photographs ever made in the beginning of the 19th century were described as this is the first building ever to draw its own picture. You know, the idea that it's completely automatic, that it just happens, all of us know that that's not true. When we've tried to make photographs with anything more complicated maybe than an iPhone, you get the light setting wrong, you get the speed wrong, you make mistakes. So there's an enormous skill set that you need in order to make certain kinds of photography. And then what's happened obviously technologically is that there are other kinds of photographic apparatus that need less of a skill set. So I'm great with an iPhone, probably most of us are, but I wouldn't be able to operate the equipment that Miles uses.
But I think that's true of all art, isn't it? That, you know, I mean, all these Turners in this room here were painted by somebody who studied the use of oil paint and stretching canvases, and probably did some classes on perspective, even though it's not really apparent. And you know, even Lord Snowdon's quote. I mean, you know, the idea that you can't use I mean, someone has to have a talent to use a pencil, just like you have to have a talent to use a camera. I think all art is a sort of a mixing of the imagination with the technical. And
I'd like to bring in Gregory, because you haven't actually spoken, Greggy. Hello. There you are. How nice to see you. As a kind of editor, a commissioning editor, I mean, what you're looking for, obviously, is kind of artwork in photography. I wanted to slightly open it out a little bit. Do you think that the work that you see has been affected by the moving image, which is obviously another thing that's completely altered art generally? But do you find that that's changing photography, the work that you see?
I mean, a lot of people are submitting to us now like things called photo films, which are kind of photographs. Well, they once would have been photographs, but now they're kind of short documentaries. But in terms of the still image, I wouldn't say that it's affected it personally.
Yeah. Do you find that things like social media have affected the work that you've been sent in?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the way that we look at information now in kind of disparate strands is kind of falling into art. That didn't make much sense as a sentence. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that's remarkable about that is that now you don't have to decide before you set out whether you're going to make a moving image or a still image, because the same apparatus can be used to make both. And I think that is
by mistake.
Yeah,
I find.
Mean, that happens. That happens. You know, we press the wrong button. That's completely revolutionary. If you think about it in historic terms, if you were going to make a documentary, you had to take a film camera with you. If you wanted to make still photographs, you had to take a still camera with you. Yeah. Now you can go out to make still photographs and decide to make a small video. This is an amazing kind of blurring now of the boundaries that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to actually, if we can, run a kind of VT now, a Don McCullum VT. He's talking in 2012 for a show that there was on at Tate. It was showed his documentary work rather than his kind of wall work and his landscapes. And I'd just like to run this VT because it actually picks up on something that you've just been talking about, and then we can move on to photography is the idea of a kind of real medium.
I had a very, very close association with London, having been born in London and having been born on the wrong side of the tracks, as they say. And I started seeing people sleeping in shop doorways. And when I went to third world countries, people would refuse to believe there were poor people in England. But there were many, many untold truths about this country. We had poverty, we had unemployment, we had a class system that wasn't convenient, and all kinds of things that people who lived outside of England wouldn't have understood. So when I started walking the streets of London and seeing people sleeping in shop doorways, even I was shocked. What I tried to do is I tried to draw those people into my vision. I try to make myself unimportant in the presence of such people. And I try to let their eyes meet my eyes, which I think in many cases I've managed to succeed. I want them to see I am no harm, no threat to them. I want them to see that I'm looking at them through a pair of eyes that have enormous compassion and understanding.
Don McCullum's photographs are generally considered obviously to be powerful, but also incredibly moving. And I think that it's very interesting that he said that one of the ways that he could get those photographs is actually by bringing himself as a person into the way that he gets to photographs. He says he lets them know that he has compassion. I find that interesting, given that photographs are generally assumed as a medium to be something that is real. You're just documenting something that's there. It's not you. You don't bring anything to it. You just turn up, you take a photograph, and that's a real thing. He's slightly skewing that, isn't he?
Don McCullum's work has been, and his life has been dedicated to bringing images forward that we otherwise wouldn't have seen. And I think that the first decision that a photographer makes, which is so important, so creative, is what to look at. What is it that, basically in those images that we were seeing, Don McCullum was photographing people that we would avoid looking at, the people that you ignore when you're walking down the street, the homeless person sleeping in a doorway. He made the decision not to ignore those things and to actually focus upon them. But also, more than that, he also, as he said, brought his own background to the way that he did that. And if you look at those images, some of those portraits, they have an incredible sense of the history of portraiture, of the history of the social commentary. And you can see, at a stretch, you could see Hogarth in some of those pictures. The idea that you're showing another side of the life of London. You're showing something that most people don't consider to be worthy of attention. I think that's a really powerful function that photography has, to make us look at things that we otherwise wouldn't. And to make us look, not just look at things that we otherwise wouldn't, perhaps look in a different way as well. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, and I think that's where the idea of the photographer as an artist comes in, of course, because the camera is just a tool, just a machine. It's completely objective, and if one was able to operate it without any feeling or any imagination, it would just literally record the world. But actually, because there's a human being at the other side of it, viewing through the lens, and Diane Arbus was very clear about this when she said that when she went into a room to take a photograph, or when she met someone to photograph, rather than rearranging the room, she would move herself to find the position to take the picture from. And so there's a sort of, that's her decision to see this person or this room from that place. And that, I think, just that simple act is being an artist, is where to position the camera, how to tell the story, how to create symbols within the image. It's interesting for me seeing those Don McCullum pictures. I like all of them because he's a great photographer. But the one of the tramp sleeping with the bollard leaning towards him seems to be of a whole other category of brilliance, because it's got this surrealist Freudian thing going on, as well as just documenting London. And I think that's what great artists do, is that they see the world, but then there's this whole other pantomime and theatre that are going on inside their own heads, from their childhood, from memory, from things they've read, all of that, and these things meet. And that's why for Don McCullum, I imagine this leaning bollard was also interesting.
Yeah. Fiona, what about you? Do you find that the idea that a photograph is more real, in inverted commas, than a painting or a film, I suppose? Has that affected your work, or do you ignore that kind of strand?
Well, I think it's a myth that a photograph is a real depiction of the world. It never was, and it still isn't, because I think all photographers or artists who use photography are constructing the world. They're reconstructing the world in some way, shape or form. And I think that just that photography is not how our eyes see. We don't have everything kind of collapsed down on one plane. We can only have a certain depth of focus. We can't see what's far away and what's right up close to us at the same time. So I think that the interesting thing is that there's still this kind of myth that persists that photography is a kind of naturalised way of looking. And I think the other thing that's really interesting now in a contemporary sense is that so much of our relationship with the world is mediated through screens. in some way, shape or form.
Like now.
And, you know, whether it's, yeah, exactly, whether it's the computer screen or the television screen or the car windscreen. I did a set of works that were taken through car windscreens. So I think that, you know, when we look through screens, we don't see the ground, you know, we have things framed and cropped. And these are all constructions in some way.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to, can we show some, we have some photographs of Shaw and Moriyama. Can we put those, ping them up and we can have a quick look? Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. Yeah. And here we have, Simon, I'm going to throw to you. Would you like to
here we
talk
have
about
more
this?
of the real unmediated world of Chris Shaw. Chris Shaw is an incredibly interesting photographer who started started his career thinking about photographing the world around him, and had this moment in his life where he found himself homeless and needed somewhere to live, and got a job as a night porter. And many of the works we're showing at Tate Britain at the moment is this series, Life as a Night Porter. So he would carry around it's actually quite contemporary when you think about it, he would carry around this little disposable camera. He would photograph things happening in the hotel at night, and then he would go to the darkroom and print up these beautiful black and white prints of various happenings in the hotel at night. And I think this really underlines what Fiona's saying about the kind of mediation of photography. Of course, it's not transparent. It's a completely constructed, mediated kind of way of seeing the world. But it is something that's nevertheless can be very immediate to our lives. You can really show exactly what was happening around you. I love the work by Chris Shaw when he's showing kind of naked men locked out of their hotel rooms at night, that he has to escort them back to their hotel room, and he would say that, you know,
after photographing them.
Well, yeah, exactly. So these guys would take the wrong door out of their room, think they were going to the bathroom, end up naked in the corridor, and he would walk them back to their room, and he'd take a picture of them, and that would become, you know, that's a view of themselves that they would never see. Obviously, you see yourself walking away from yourself naked at night, and I think there's something quite remarkable about this sense of re-showing us the world that we already know. We already know these things happen. Another thing that Fiona said that's fascinating, obviously we haven't mentioned this, but we talked about Don McCullin, we talked about Chris Shaw and Daido Moriyama. They all work quite predominantly in black and white. And of course the world's not black and white, we know that, but nowadays we're all much more familiar with this idea of the mediations of photography through things like Instagram, because you can turn your beautiful photograph or your not so beautiful photograph into a very beautiful black and white image. So these kinds of things remind us, Instagram reminds us that the photographic process was always about selection, editing, cropping, filters.
Choices.
Yeah. We are actually going to be talking about that a little bit later. But before we do, I thought it might be quite nice, given that we just talked about, I suppose, kind of slightly reportage, although, you know, not reportage as we've unpicked, as a style of photography. I'd also like to talk about fashion photography, because they're seen as actually two completely different things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Fashion photography is seen as something that is constructed. It requires a whole team, a lovely hotel, stylists, beautiful models.
We get locked out of.
And it's very much the opposite of somebody just kind of rocking up with a small camera.
Although, of course, the two things do interchange, and there is a style of fashion photography which is just somebody taking pictures on, you know, an Instamatic. But yes, I see your point.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you know, if one was being completely cynical, would you say that all fashion photography is in the end advertising or not?
No, I wouldn't at all. I mean, I like to take Richard Avedon and then Helmut Newton as great guides in this. And for me, they were both artists who not only documented the latest sort of Balenciaga or Dior outfits.
What's that?
But you know, also, I mean, I really feel that, you know, post-war New York and post-war Paris comes through the feelings of that life, those worlds come through in the pictures of Avedon, and similarly in Newton's pictures from the 70s, you get a sense of the sort of the darkness of the kind of, you know, drug culture and the sort of the sexual culture that was going on in Newton's work. And, you know, this has got nothing to do with the clothes. The clothes are there. People wear clothes. It's a consequence of not being locked out of a hotel room, I suppose. But, you know, the clothes are there. And I mean, I think when people went to see my exhibition at Somerset House, I don't feel that many people left that show feeling that they'd seen a lot of photographs of clothes. I believe they saw photographs of humans.
Yeah, and also roles.
Reenacting roles, yes, characters.
Yeah.
So
female roles, very much so.
So I think that's why fashion photography has been sort of, in the last 15 years, been drawn into being considered as art.
Yeah.
And because in a way, it's just another point of view.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a little bit of a VT of you actually, which I'd like to show, and then perhaps you could talk about it because it has a kind of art reference.
I wonder what Mark Gertler would make of all of this. The camera was just in its infancy in 1916. The idea of photography as art is still very far away from his experience of photography.
Yeah, do you want to explain what
was I doing there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to do a project that was a response to a painting that's actually here at Tate Britain, which is by Mark Gertler, painted in 1916, called The Merry-Go-Round. And it's a painting I've always loved. It has this kind of strange quality of almost being like an Edwardian pop art painting, because there's elements of Peter Blake in there in a way. It's got this sort of, it's very British, but it's broken down into these very simple colours, and the characters, the roles, the soldier, the sailor, the young ladies, the little boy, are very generic and almost like kind of cutouts from a pop art, painting. And so the idea was to do a photographic kind of response to this work, just to sort of see where that would take me, really. And so for me, it became an exercise in the roles, again, the characters, and colour, and performance, and cropping, and as I discovered, this was a very recent project. Like all my work, there's the idea, but you're very much led by where the camera takes you. And as a photographer, you have an idea, but the camera sort of speaks back to you and shows you what's working, what's not working. And again, in this kind of DNR way, you move your camera to find the position.
That's true of all creative efforts, isn't it? You perhaps have an idea of what you think you're going to achieve, and then actually the process takes you perhaps somewhere else.
There's those two analogies of sculpture, isn't there? There's the one sculpture that's kind of constructed and built from the ground up, and then there's the other one that the sculptor sees this piece of work inside the stone and carves a way to get to it. I think photography is more the former, that you're kind of constructing this thing as you go along. You sort of things reveal themselves to you as you go.
Okay. Hello, are you still there down there? My lovely Google Hangout people down video. We're going to move on now into the emergence of social media, and I know that, Michael, you have quite a lot to say about this. I want to ask you a very straightforward question, which is the Instagram selfie art? Can it be?
I believe so. I believe so. I think anyone can capture an instant moment, but it still has to be memorable and timeless. I ask myself this question every time I'm scrolling through hundreds of images a day, and I'm like, what's standing out? What's cutting through the clutter here? And I think it's possible for it to become art. Some of the images you're looking at on screen right now are from a photo show that I'm curating, which is all iPhone photos, all portraits. And we're trying to take these iPhone images and put them on gallery walls, and to say, hey, a great image is a great image, no matter what kind of camera you use. Storytelling, subject matter, lighting, composition, all hold true in a great image, whether you're using an iPhone or a Hasselblad. So why can't these be considered art? Why can't we frame them really well and present them well? So I think it's possible, but like I said earlier, there's so many images to look through it. You really have to have a strong point of view as a photographer and an artist to sort of cut through the clutter. And you know, I've noticed a lot of great photographers that can't shoot on an iPhone, and I've seen photographers spawn careers off iPhone, and now they're shooting professionally, and I think that's really fascinating. It's
Will
very,
it work? I mean, just a quick question about if you
yeah,
take that image out of the iPhone, you know, size, I suppose really. I mean, it's designed to be small,
yeah.
grab you very quickly. I mean, if you take that out and put it on a wall in a kind of contemporary, a classic kind of museum way, will that not kind of kill those images?
No, I think it elevates the quality, like Fiona was saying earlier. Everyone's looking to see everything. Everyone sees images on screens these days, and to take a little 640 by 640 pixel image and blow it up on the wall to 12 inches by 12 inches, I think there's an intimacy that the viewer has when looking at the print, and I think it definitely elevates it. Quite a bit, you know. The interesting thing about the apps like Instagram is the sharing aspect, how people can get feedback on their images really quickly, and how it inspires them to go out into the world and see the world differently and be more creative, and that's very, very powerful to me.
It is powerful. It also can be very brutal, to be honest. You can put something up and everyone will tell you it's rubbish.
Yeah, it's true. People are very honest, and I appreciate that. I think it pushes people to see the world, find beauty in the mundane, and people with no photographic training start finding these little creative impulses, and that to me is like very, very powerful. I'm excited to see how it goes. And again, yes, there's a lot of crap out there. Excuse my language. So you really need to.
We can use that.
Yeah.
Gregory, I just wanted to ask you, do you find that, I mean, obviously an Instagram is a very particular way of looking at photographs. It's very quick, you scroll through. Has that affected the way that you present images in a magazine as well? I can't hear you, I'm afraid. Can you hear, Gregory?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah, hello.
Hello. Not particularly. I mean, what we look for in the photographs that we show in Hot Shoe isn't necessarily the aesthetic, but it's the kind of concept that comes along with them and the idea. So, I mean, whether a picture's been on Instagram, like, doesn't really make that much difference to us.
It's almost the opposite then, isn't it, really? I mean, because Instagram quite often is almost devoid of context. There's no time to give it a context, whereas you're actually talking about something completely different. You're talking about photography in a completely different way. Yeah,
I mean, like, most of the images on Instagram kind of would fall into, like, useful photography as a category for us. So, like, stock photography or vernacular photography or a diary of your diet, but not necessarily art.
Controversy. Michael, will you want to step in?
That's not to say that all of it isn't art.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few artists that use iPhone only and that have elevated the art form. I just think a great image transcends the type of camera you use. I really, really do. Yes, it's easy to use an iPhone, but you still have to have a story to tell, like Miles was saying, and a strong point of view. It really doesn't matter. It's just a tool. It's just a tool.
Okay, Simon, I'm going to ask you, are you about to put a show on of Instagram photos?
Well, you know what's really interesting is that the museum is the destination for, the museum is where things end up after they've been filtered and screened over many years. And in fact, really, we could say the same about many kinds of photography that end up in museums, that wasn't the original reason that they were made. We could think about August Sander making commercial portraits that are now treated in this very reverential way. We could talk about some of the photographers that you mentioned, Avedon and Newton. William Klein, we had a huge show of Klein. He did a lot of great work for magazines and photo books. The medium for William Klein was the photo book, and yet now we make exhibitions and we show them on the wall. And I think really the museum is a great place to see things, to think about them, to have a little bit of time around the object. And I think what you were describing of scrolling through, that really tells us something about one way of understanding images. Another way is to just take one of them out, put it on the wall, and look at it for 10 minutes rather than 10 seconds. And I think that that's the job of the museum. It means that we're editorial, that inevitably museums have to be editorial, but that's not a problem, and time is also editorial. So we will find out in 50 years' time whether any of the Instagram or iPhone artists are ranked alongside some of their peers who use Hasselblads or whatever.
Time is a very brutal curator, isn't it, really? Fiona, you've made that fantastically interesting point about us looking at screens and using it. So I just wanted to ask you, given that your work is actually kind of installation, it's actually completely different from what we were talking about, Instagram or even on the walls. Do you deliberately move away from our contemporary way of looking at screens then?
I think it's really interesting because I think, you know, we've been speaking about a huge range, you know, from reportage to fashion photography to, you know, constructed artworks. And I think that through all of those, there's this desire for a kind of a material presence, or to experience a photograph as an object in front of you in a space. And I think to a large extent that's what museums do. They create this context for the work to be in. And I think, you know, my background is actually as a sculptor. I've never trained officially as a photographer, although everything I've learned as I needed it along the way. But my real interest is in the photograph, or a group of photographs, as a sort of physical presence in a space. So their relationship to us, as you know, our scale, and to the scale and the presence of the architecture is what I'm interested in. So those images that have been put up of the installation at Matt's gallery last year. The photographs actually came off the wall, you know, and I situated them in the space of the viewer, and so as the viewer walked around, there was also seating in the space. So the viewer was kind of framing and reframing the work as they were moving around the space. So
moving through it.
It's putting the viewer in this kind of position of kind of creating views and compositions. As well as myself as the kind of choreographer of that kind of act of viewing.
So completely different, I have to say. So Miles, I'm going to throw to you as a very last thing before we wrap up. We have done a kind of huge roundup. Sorry, in a very small amount of time.
Sure.
I'd just like you, I suppose, just to mention a couple of photographs that have, you've mentioned a couple of works that have influenced you, but if you wanted people to take something away from our talk about photography, what would it be?
Gosh, other than to see more, I'm not sure what else to say really. I mean, I don't feel photography needs a defender. I mean, it's clearly loved and adored, and it's great shows at modern Tate Britain on photography. Bookshops are full
in many different ways, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose when I started photography about 18 years ago, the books on photography there were fewer books on photography, and now, you know, there's probably as many books on photography as there is on painting, possibly more, I would say, in my local bookshop when I kind of go in. It's a very popular medium. I think, as I said, doesn't need any kind of defending.
We don't defend it, we support it.
Yes.
So look, I'm sorry, we have to wind up. It's the nature of these things that we get a conversation going and then we have to go like that. But I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone down the line. I'm waving at you, Fiona, Gregory and Michael. Thank you to Simon, and thank you to Miles, and thank you to everyone for watching.